I have a teaching that I want to share today about firepower, but especially in calling down fire. And it's interesting because in the New Testament we see that James and John, the sons of Zebedee, they wanted to call down fire from heaven and consume those in Samaria that were against the Lord and against his ways. And Jesus said, wow, you don't know what spirit you're of, because I didn't come to judge, but I came to save. And he was trying to point out a condition of the heart, you know, because he didn't come to bring a critical judgment, a harsh judgment. He came to save. The word save there means actually to be saved, rescued, healed, delivered, prospered, all the things that would take us out of darkness and put us in the light. And so Jesus, you know, had issues to say, and I think they probably said that they wanted to call down fire because they had heard the stories about Elijah. And so in 1 Kings 18, we see the story of Elijah, and it was interesting because while we're believing for this outpouring of the baptism with fire, we see that in the Old Testament, we had a whole nation that had turned away from God. King Ahab had turned the people away to worship false idols like Baal worshippers and Ashtoreth, which was sexual deities, and they had turned immoral. It was horrible. They had turned away from pure worship and compromised their faith. And then Ahab married Jezebel, and it got even worse. And people were following the leader's instruction that wasn't right. And I just want to say this, that if a leader leads you astray from the word of God, don't follow that. This whole nation followed the leader. And if you are a leader, I want to say to you, follow God with uprightness and purity, because you are required by God to lead according to righteousness. And so anyways, in Elijah's day, there was all these false prophets, and those false prophets originally had been God's prophets, but they turned away to follow after Baal, so they became a spokesperson for the false idols instead of a spokesperson for God. And so this is being addressed by Elijah, who is one man who is willing to speak the truth in love. And God is desiring a company of people to be raised up to speak the truth in love in this hour. And that means you. He's calling his prophets out of the cage. But Elijah confronts the prophets of Baal. He says, come on, we'll gather you all together on Mount Carmel. So he did. And he said this, he said, we're going to have a test here to see who the real God is, because the true God will be the God who answers by fire. And he was talking about real fire, a manifestation of fire that came from God. Now, in, I think it's Leviticus or Numbers, it talks about this strange fire that was put on the altar. And that was a fire that was produced by the power of man and not by the power of God. But the fire that we are looking for in this hour is a fire power that comes from the Spirit of God. And we, the people of God, can start to pray down that fire. Because when God manifests in this true fire, it is going to bring forth a harvest. So that when Elijah said that God who answers by fire is the true God, he was standing there, and I believe he was actually binding the power of the enemy, because those false prophets, they agreed with him to do it because they were used to seeing their God show up, the false God, the demonic entity. But when they called on their God, he wouldn't bring down fire. I don't think he could, because a man of God stood in his way. But then Elijah, he calls on his God, and it was amazing because he poured out water in the trenches and water on the sacrifice. And this was a time in drought, so there wasn't water to be found, but he calls for it. And then he calls on his God, and he says, God, I want you to answer by fire. And God released fire from heaven into the earth, and it consumed all the sacrifice. And as a result, all the false prophets said, the Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God. There is a move of God coming. It is a move of fire where God is going to manifest his fire. And we, his people, he's looking for us to call down that fire Start calling on this baptism with fire, because when it comes, it's going to come from the true and the living God. It's not going to be a false move. It's not going to be a false revival. It's going to be the true and the living God's fire that is going to consume the offering. And you can lay yourself on that altar. I'm saying, God, just accept me. Just let the fire of your love come and consume me with every part of you. Let that fire power come and absorb me. Let it ignite me. Let it ignite fresh passion in me. And let me blaze with so much fire that the whole world will say, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And so I want to encourage you to pray, because God will first release a prophetic word saying the fire's coming, but then He needs prayer warriors to bring down that fire. Now, we're already seeing some measure of fire come, but it's nothing compared to what is going to come. And so I'm asking you, pray for the fire. Call down the fire. I also want to let you know that we have resource available that'll help you get connected to that fire. For example, we have our DVD. We did a documentary. I call it a docu-prophecy. And it is called Baptized with Fire, a Prophecy. And it features men of God like Cheon and Dr. Bill Johnson and Heidi Baker, Stacy Campbell, Robert Slerdon. You know, we have rabbis, historians, you know, different accounts from historical revivals on there to prophesy the release of this move of God that's coming in this hour. It is so powerful what God is going to do in this coming hour. So you want to get that DVD. It's called Baptized with Fire, a Prophecy. And it's a documentary or docu-prophecy, I call it. We also have a CD set called The Man of Fire. And that's 2 CD teachings by 2 prophetic voices, Stacy Campbell and myself. And it was just amazing the way that came about, because we were at a leaders summit in Canada and we were scheduled to teach the afternoon sessions back to back. So Stacy had asked me to go first, and then she said, what are you preaching on? I said, well, I'm going to preach on the baptism with fire. She says, you're kidding, that's what I'm going to preach on. She says, I can't be at your session because I have to go run some errands, but maybe I'll preach something else rather than the same message. And I said, no, I think God has this set up, because in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, it will be established. So I preached my message, then she came in and I sat in her session and listened to hers. I could not believe it. There was such confirmation and such power between the 2 messages. They just dovetailed together. And so it's a very powerful CD set that you'll want to get for yourself or for your friends. And these are downloadable online as well. You can get the downloadable versions on xpmedia.com or xpministries.com or any of the digital portals. But it's called The Man of Fire. And then also I have a soaking CD. It's called Soaking in the Holy Fire. And it is a very powerful thing with, I think there's about 14 different tracks in it, where I soak you to worship music with decrees and prayers regarding the different aspects of the fire. So those are different tools that we have for you that you can get online. And I'm praying for you that you will receive the fire of His love, the fire of His power, the fire of His purity, the fire of His blessing, the fire of His zeal, that you'll be filled with all goodness, with the fullness of His glorious revival fire.